Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Our webinar today is A New Retail is Coming. Let me introduce our speakers really fast. Our first speaker is Chris Walton. He's the CEO and founder of Red Archer Retail and Omni Talk. He is a leading expert and influencer in omni-channel retailing, an accomplished senior executive with nearly 20 years of success within the retail and retail technology industries. Red Archer Retail and Omni Talk are one of the fastest growing blogs in retail. Prior to starting Red Archer Retail and Omni Talk, Chris worked for Target, where he was the vice president of the retailer's Store of the Future project, and also the vice president of merchandising for home furnishings on Target.com. Chris began his career at Gap and holds a BA in economics and history from Stanford University, as well as an MBA from the Harvard Business School. Chris, why don't you say hello?
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here.
Thanks, Chris. Moderating is Tehsin Daya from Uberall. Tehsin joins Uberall with more than 10 years of experience in location marketing. Before joining Uberall, Tehsin spent 6 years in a variety of roles, including Senior Director for Reach Local's partner channel business, and prior to that, on the corporate strategy team, where he held key ecosystem and strategic partnerships, including Facebook. Tehsin holds a BA from Indiana University and an MBA from the Pepperdine University. Tehsin, why don't you say hello and take it away?
Hi, thanks, Caroline. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining on this webinar and welcome. Happy New Year to everyone. And thanks, Chris, for joining as well. Great to do this with you. And Chris, pretty appropriate time at the beginning of 2019 when we are seeing some pretty striking headlines come our way. One in particular that caught my eye was the Wall Street Journal. Mall vacancies stand at a 7-year high of 9.1% in Q3. Nearing their peak from 2011. And then, of course, Sears, just a couple of days ago, read a headline which said facing liquidation, possible bankruptcy buyout, worth $4.4 billion and 80 stores closing in March. So just kind of topsy-turvy when it comes to retail these days. So, and you juxtapose that with Google, Amazon, and Facebook as the new frontier. I think, the listeners dialing in are probably just curious to hear all around as to what your insights and thoughts might be around the subject and related subjects. So with that, I will let you kick it off and come back in a little bit. So take it away, Chris.
Awesome. Yeah, those are some pretty amazing headlines right out of the gate, especially with Sears. I think I've been seeing a lot of things on the wire today of people saying, oh, finally feels like it's been 15 years in the making, but we'll see where it ends up going. But yeah, hopefully today we can talk through some of the big top level trends that I think that I'm seeing and in terms of how this new retail or this new world of omni-channel retail is going to shape up over the next few years. I thought before I get started, I give you guys a little bit of background about myself, just a couple minutes in addition to what was shared by Caroline and the team. But like she said, 20 years in retail, started my career at the Gap. I can remember back in 1999 writing purchase orders for men's denim jeans, 40 sizes by hand. So I got to cut my teeth doing that day in and day out. I then went to business school, and after business school, I took my first job at Target, and this was back in 2005. I did the traditional path mainly. I went into stores merchandising. My first job there was actually as the buyer for seasonal bath and rugs. I always joke that it was my grandmother's favorite job that I ever had at Target. I then went into the field and did a number of different roles for Target. I moved out to Colorado, ran my own store for a period of time, as well as ran a district of stores spread across northern Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, and South Dakota, so some of the more glamorous states in the country. Spent about 30,000 miles in my car a year, but got to see retail from an entirely different walk of life, and it was probably the single best decision I ever made in my career. It's probably one of the big reasons I'm sitting here talking on this webinar today. From there, as was mentioned, I became the vice president of home furnishings for Target.com. I headed up a project called the Store of the Future, which, to give you some background, which is, I think, germane to this discussion, it was really Target coming to me and saying, 5 to 10 years out, Chris, why are people still coming to physical stores to shop? And what would your conception of the Target brand be, in trying to answer that question? That project ended just at the beginning of 2017. I ended up leaving Target later on that summer and decided to venture out on my own. And that's where I decided to start my own company, Red Archer Retail. I was 40 years old at the time. Give you a little more background about myself. My father died on a commercial airline disaster when he was 38. So I said to myself, you know what? I've got some interesting experience. I've got some interesting stories to tell. I think now's the time to kind of venture out on my own. I'd always had an entrepreneurial bug. So formed my company, Red Archer Retail. And really we do two things. And we're going to talk about a lot of that here today. But The first thing we do is we're a content platform. So I have my own blog. It's called Omni Talk. I write regularly for Forbes. I'm a contributor for them. I write for the Robin Report. We do weekly videos and podcasts, all on really how the future of retail is going to unfold. And then the next thing we do is my business partner, Ann Mazinga, and we are actually in the process right now, if you follow us on social media, of building a retail lab where we live in Minneapolis. And the idea with that lab is really to put the content that we put out there to the test, really eat what we cook, and create a place where retailers, brands, and retail technology companies can come together to do experiments live in front of consumers, but in a safe way and outside of the mainstream of their operations, because we think that's a core tenet of how innovation needs to take place. So we're in the process of doing that. We hope we'll kick it off in March. And the reason we want to do that is really we believe in trying to advance the cause of innovation within retail and trying to harness our own, and then also contribute as much as we can to the understanding of retail's evolution. So without further ado, really to us, we focus Red Archer on what is the store of the future. And so from there, as Caroline will show in the next slide, before we get started, I want to really put definition and guardrails around that term. I actually just recently put a post out on Forbes around this in more detail. If you guys want to check that out, I did that for this webinar, and you can see it in more detail as well. But essentially, when someone says store of the future, usually I stop them and I say, before we go further, let's understand what you really mean, because store of the future can really mean three different things depending on who you're talking to. And so to set some guardrails, number one, it has to do with incremental innovation. And so those are the things people are describing as store of the future initiatives that you're hearing a lot about. Those are the things that are typically in press releases. They're talked about in earnings reports. It could be like the Walmart commercial at the Golden Globes, if you happen to see that. It could be the latest buy online, pick up in store initiative, new product launches. But it's things that at the end of the day aren't fundamentally changing the underlying business model economics of a retailer. The retailer is still doing their business pretty much the same way day in and day out. Yes, the initiatives are different than what came before them in the past, but fundamentally they're not changing anything radically for the future. Now, number two is different. Number two is what I would call really true store of the future work. And that's where you find truly new and scalable ideas for how a retailer might operate its business. So great examples of this would be, and it's been in the media a lot this week, Amazon Go. Rumors of 3,000 stores, as much as $4.5 billion of new volume for Amazon over the next 3 years. A completely new business idea that runs on completely different business model economics. Another great example would be, say, Restoration Hardware and their mega experience stores, if you've ever been to them. There's no inventory in those stores for purchase. They're essentially showrooms, but they're also huge experiences in terms of just luxury and eating and dining and almost like tourist attractions that you want to go and be a part of. And so those are now popping up throughout the country. They're having a tremendous amount of success there. But again, very different than how Restoration Hardware did their business in the past. Now, the third track for Store of the Future is really where I spend most of my career and where most of my knowledge base resides, and that's in what's called something I call concept work. Now, that's akin to the concept car in the auto industry. So the idea there is that you're doing live experimentation out in front of consumers. Now, some of what you do might work, some of what you do might fail, but at the end of the day, the idea is that you're trying to run experiments and that you're funneling the lessons from those experiments back into tracks 1 and tracks 2 over time. Now, if you're doing this right as a retailer, you probably have some degree of bet placed across all 3 of those tracks. And it just depends on the relative strength of your business model to decide how much money you want to place in each of those tracks. Now, interestingly enough, Amazon probably has the strongest business model going, and they are decidedly heavily invested in track number 3, concept work. As a great example of concept work just a year ago was Amazon Go. Amazon Go was dark to the public. It was only open to employees. But now, suddenly, after a year of just putting it out there as a concept, in a kind of dark way, it's now become a scalable kind of track 2 idea. Amazon spends $22 billion a year in that type of work. To give you guys some perspective, that's $6 billion more than the next closest competitor, which is Google. Retailers don't even crack the top 10. So you can see that the people that are doing very well within this space, Amazon and others, they're spending the money on the R&D. So again, you have to place your bets. And so where I'm going to focus with you today is, if it was me and I was thinking about where the store of the future is going to unfold, this, as you'll see on the next slide, these are really the 5 trends that I think are going to shape retail's future here in the very short term, so say the next 1 to 3 years. So to get our mind going, to touch on the first trend, I'm going to show you a statistic. So on this next page, here's a number, 49%. Now, so for those of you listening, you can try to guess what this is. If I was doing this in front of a live audience, I'd ask for some volunteers. But that's harder to do on a webinar. So 49% here basically represents the percentage of time that when people know what they want to buy or have a strong inkling of what they want to buy, it indicates where they go for their first product search. So 49% of the time when people know what they want or have an inkling of what they want, they're going to Amazon. Now, if you go to the next slide, you'll see the statistic in an even different light. You see on the next slide, you'll see 49% of the time they go to Amazon, 36% of the time they actually go to Google. So 85% of the time when people know what they want or have an inkling of what they want to buy, they're going to Amazon or Google to search for it and to find it. Which, even more importantly, if you stop and think about it, that means only 15% of the time are consumers actually going to retailers, brands, or websites to find what they're looking for. And that number, if you actually track it over time, has been decreasing as well. And so it is very important to think about who you are as a brand, who you are as a retailer, what data you need to have a cognizance of, and how you're coming across, within that digital sphere. Because as you'll see on the next slide, what this data means around first product searches is really trend number one. And that's the idea of the virtual mall, or another way to say it, that the physical mall, as we used to know it, almost like the mall that's in our minds, say from movies like Fast Times at Ridgemont High or something like that. The physical mall as a means for find, seek, and destroy product acquisition is dead. All of that activity is now happening virtually. It's happening through the digital sphere. And if you stop and think about it, as you'll see in this next discussion, there's a good psychological reason for why this has happened. As you see on the next slide, stores throughout their history have always existed for 5 key reasons. Stores, and it's almost connoted in the word of stores itself, stores of inventory. But this is important to consider as we talk about this new world of retail. Stores always existed for 1, inspiration, 2, of course, convenience, 3, the idea of immediate gratification, 4, and this is important, this idea that I call taction. And taction is meant to connote touching, feeling, trying things on, all the sensory things that give one confidence in their purchase. And then, of course, lastly, just the sheer experience and memory of being somewhere, the sheer social joy of shopping, either on your own or with someone else. Now, if you look at the history of retail, on the next slide, what you see is that retail has forever been a creature of habit. Every 30 to 40 years, retail innovation cycles like clockwork. You can go all the way back to the 1800s and you can see this pattern. Now, I'll only go back for the purposes of this discussion to the late 1950s, early 1960s. I find this period of time really interesting because I call it the mass productization of America. Right down the road from where I live in Minneapolis, you had the first shopping mall, Southdale Shopping Mall, just down the road. And then in 1962, you had the rise of, coincidentally, Walmart, Target, and Kmart all at the same time. And what that meant was that you now had large amounts of products made available to the masses in a much more convenient way than ever before. You could now go to those stores as a means of product acquisition that was more convenient than you'd ever seen in the past. But of course, it came at a cost, right? So the experience at that mall in Minneapolis was the same as the experience in New Jersey or California, or the Walmart in Bentonville was the same in Boise, Idaho, let's say. But now, flash forward on the next slide, things have changed. Once eBay and Amazon came into the scene in the mid-90s, digital basically came into the arena and said, look, those first 3 things that used to be the purview of physical stores, inspiration, convenience, and immediate gratification, we, digital, can do those things as well, if not better than you can. And via the rise of the mobile phone, a la around 2007, it's made it even more so. And so all that remains now to truly differentiate a physical from a digital experience is really those last 2 points, the idea of taction, touching, feeling, trying products on, and the sheer experience and memory of being somewhere. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Amazon is Amazon social media can be very inspirational experiences. Amazon, you can control your fulfillment at the press of a button for when you want it. And it's a unique experience to you. If you think about it, what's beautiful about digital is no one individual's digital commercial experience is like any other. Mine is different than Tehsin's, mine is different from Caroline's, mine is different from anyone else's that's listening on this phone. Now, what that implies as we go forward into that next cycle of innovation, I think that's the big question. So the big question as we go forward into trend number 2 is, if you believe that timeline, 2020, 2030, as shown on the next slide, the big question is, what will happen in the world of retail? And specifically for my mind, as you'll see, what's going to happen in terms of the physical world of retail to make experiences become more personalized to the individual. And I joke here, but as you'll see on the slide, some of what you see in Minority Report, coming out just at the turn of the century, some of the things you saw within that movie are actually much closer than you probably think they are in terms of how soon they will appear. So that brings us to trend number 2. So trend number 2 is what I call the rise of social commerce. And this was touched on a little bit in the overview. But if you believe that search is now essentially the purview of Google and or Amazon, when people know what they want, they're going to those two places to find things, it really becomes a question of discovery. And so the question of who owns discovery, both in the physical world and the digital world, is still very up for grabs. We're going to start our discussion on the digital world. The next slide is probably my favorite single slide that I've seen in, I can't say this year anymore because it's the start of 2019, but throughout all of 2018, this is my favorite slide. It was from a colleague of mine, Carter Jensen, who does a lot of work for us at Omni Talk. But basically, the way he thinks about it is he thinks about everything as a horizontal. He calls it the horizontal of commerce. And the best way to think about this in the rise of social commerce is take a commercial platform like Amazon on one side, let's say the right-hand side, okay? And then juxtapose that on the other side with a social network like Facebook, say, and it's 2 billion users. Whoever can control that horizontal from end to end has a tremendous data advantage. So if you think about it, based on what we said, Amazon, Google, they know what we explicitly want every single day because we tell them what we're looking for. Facebook, on the other hand, has an inherent advantage in the sense that they know implicitly what we want as well. You stop and think about it. One of my favorite things that I do every day, I wake up in the morning, I look at the on this day. I can see the past, X number of years of my life. Facebook knows what I'm doing. They know what I'm liking. They know what I'm commenting on. They even know how long I'm stopping to scroll past pictures of old, girlfriends from high school. They know more about me probably than I even know myself. And so from a commercial perspective, in terms of what can be offered up and served up from a discovery standpoint in the digital sphere, that completely connected horizontal line from discovery of social commerce and using the network to actually bringing people to actually conduct commerce on the other end is incredibly powerful. And so Facebook wants to go after this. So that's why you've seen the rise of Instagram shopping. That's why you've been hearing more about their Facebook marketplace. I've been talking a lot about this on Forbes if you want to read more about it. But they're not the only ones, as you'll see. Amazon on the next slide is going after it too. So Amazon's done a number of partnerships in the past year with some of their visual search capabilities, so that as you're discovering things out in the physical world, you can, tie into Snapchat's capabilities to find those products easily on Amazon. Amazon understands also that they're vulnerable along this horizontal. That's why I believe they've gone after things like Amazon Spark to try to create their own social network, but those really haven't gotten off the ground. It's really hard to replicate what, say, someone like a Facebook has. You've also seen Google try to make their marketplace or their shopping offering a lot more interesting and a lot more discovery-based too, trying to put things in there like video content and the different types of content that you see typically on an e-commerce platform to increase conversion. But again, that's a very different approach than, say, taking the entire end-to-end horizontal view of how to approach commerce. Similarly, as you'll see, there's other companies trying to get in the game. Walmart is talking all about trying to extend everything they're offering on the right-hand side of that. They're talking about, they're even creating their own, what they call a virtual mall with Lord & Taylor, with advanced auto parts on their website. But again, I think it's the right approach in terms of bolstering the right-hand side of the horizontal. But Walmart, Amazon, others are still vulnerable on that left-hand side in terms of that fully connected social network that gives you that end-to-end commercial line. So with all that said, that shows you where things are going in the digital world. I think what's interesting before we go into the physical world is if someone can connect that line, and there's examples of companies that are doing it. I'm going to show you one of them in a second. If somebody can connect that line and in the act of discovery and commerce can start to happen within the purview of whoever owns that, if you stop and think about it, what really flips it on its head, all those things I said about explicit search too in Google and Amazon, suddenly where your search is happening could start to happen in a different place too. That's far down the road, but I think it's interesting to think about. So then trend number 3, really physical discovery. It's still open season there. And so the big trend I would highlight there is really pop-up retail. And that really is about the bifurcation of what I talked about. It's about there now being a really big difference between what a physical experience is and a digital experience. And really the key to physical experiences being how do brands play up this idea of traction and the experience and social delights of shopping and of being somewhere. And so you've seen a number of people enter this game. I would say, as you'll see on the next slide, Bonobos is really who I credit as the first penguin in the water on the guide shop experiment. Now, they weren't guide shops, but at the end of the day, they were a digitally native brand that went into physical retail in a very different way. They created a guide shop approach. So you don't take any of the product from the Bonobos home. You can touch, you can feel it, you can try it on, you can see how it fits, you can even get help. But the idea is it gives you confidence in your purchase, and it runs on different working capital dynamics than traditional retail. And so, not surprising, a lot of what I call the digitally native pure plays or the cool kids have followed suit. I think I alluded to this a little bit, but Glacier to me is a great example of someone to watch and someone to follow closely. Because if you look at their trajectory and how they've gone about their business, that the social commerce horizontal line is how they've approached their business. So Glacier is a company that started out as a blog, it started as a social network. It then went into digital commerce. It then started creating its own products, went into digital commerce. And now they've just opened a much larger flagship store in New York and have opened other pop-up venues across the country. So they're thinking about it end to end, all connected within that social network. I think that's really powerful to think about. Brandless is attempting to do the same thing. You also have companies like Away that are getting in the game. The interesting thing about this is I think on the next slide, you're seeing a lot of the legacy players are going after this as well. This is going to be a really hot space. Macy's is just opened up a concept called the Market at Macy's. The idea here is they have a certain section of the floor. And the idea is that they bring these brands in that consumers don't have a ton of awareness around, these brands that are mostly digitally native. And they curate experiences and they change them up and they move them in and out frequently so that people can get the traction of understanding who these brands are. And then they also experience them and they're new and different every time they come into a Macy's. Like I said, on the next slide, this space I think will get even hotter. You have a number of companies now, startups that are starting to form around this space. You have companies like a Storefront that specializes in finding pop-up locations for retailers, for brands, so they can stand up these ideas quickly and affordably. You have companies like, say, a Fourpost or a Brand Box, a Neighborhood Goods that are actually trying to reinvent the department store, a la what Macy's is doing, but kind of doing it in their own way. And then one of the key ingredients to do is to this, of course, is what's the technology underpinnings of how it all works. You have companies like Xenia Retail, who are specialists in cloud commerce, who specialize in help standing these pop-up shop operations up across the country quickly and effectively from a technology perspective as well. As you'll see on the next slide, it's not only these companies, but some of the big tech companies are getting into this as well. So Facebook, interestingly enough, Facebook is actually a key partner with Macy's on their Market at Macy's concept, which I think could be the greatest Trojan horse play in the history of retail, because Facebook is essentially finding the brands and helping bring these brands into a physical space. But ultimately, Facebook probably doesn't need Macy's as much to do that as much as Facebook can ultimately do that themselves. But Facebook is going to learn a hell of a lot within that process. And WeWork's getting into the game too. So some of their installations, they've created partnerships with people like J.Crew, Rent the Runway. So you're starting to see physical retail pop up for the purposes of taxing, for the purposes of social joy and experience into different places than we ever thought possible before. But as you'll see on the next slide, it all begs the question as we get to trends 4 and 5, the real $64,000 question. Everything I just talked about is great, but at the end of the day, if the business model economics of physical retail don't change and you're just doing pop-up retail on a shorter term lease, has anything really changed? Has the underlying business economics of how retail works in this age of digital, is it really new and different in any way, shape, or form? And that's where trend number 4 comes in. Trend number 4 is around checkout-free retail. There's a way to use and harness technology and data to create different business model economics for all these new things that are starting. So this is one of my favorite slides, but I call it lions and tigers and Amazon Go. Oh my. As you'll see next, Amazon Go is really a marvel experience if you haven't tried it. There's ones in Seattle, San Francisco, Chicago. I had a chance to check out the one in Seattle early part of last year. I call it yuppie nirvana. To me, it's like if Whole Foods got together one night made it with a 7-Eleven, and then stood up on the mountaintop in the Coke commercial and sang a song about how great it was. It's a perfect use case for that urban consumer who's busy before or after work or on their lunch break, and they just want to get in and out quickly. The stores are really small. They're just shy of 2,000 square feet. And funny enough, like I mentioned in the beginning, there's rumored to be as many as 3,000 of them coming by 2021. And it's important to think about because it's a different way of doing the business, right? You don't need cashiers. You don't need as much staff. It just creates different business model economics. But this is not the only thing the industry is looking at from a checkout free perspective. As you see on the next slide, even Amazon itself is looking at different ways to approach checkout free experiences. So this is actually probably my favorite thing that I saw all of last year. This is an installation at the Mall of America. It's called GH Lab. It was a partnership with Good Housekeeping and Amazon, where essentially what it is, you'll see there, is it's a curation from Good Housekeeping of what they think are the best products across one's home. And they set it up in vignettes throughout the space. And then what they do is they use Amazon's application that almost all of us have on our phone. You walk in the store, open up the app, and you can scan and buy anything you want for purchase, and it's fulfilled directly from Amazon. And this has tremendous legs going forward because what this means is you can simply use Amazon's technology for both shopping and fulfillment as a brand, as say maybe a YouTube influencer, whoever you are, and you can stand up a local retail operation quicker and faster than ever before possible. And again, that has tremendous advantages from store labor perspective, from an inventory carrying cost perspective. It enables people to try these examples of pop-up retail in new ways. We're seeing tremendous things overseas. The next slide, you see offshoots of what I've talked about as well with concepts like Bingo Box. Now, these are unmanned stores where essentially people scan in, similar to how you'd scan into an Amazon Go, almost like you're getting on an airplane. Their checkout operates a little bit differently. It's more like a traditional self-checkout at the grocery store, but same general ideas. And then, of course, as well, on the next slide, it all gets fueled even further when you start adding in what I call the next trend, which is number 5, micro warehousing. Micro warehousing is really adding the gasoline to the fires. Here you see the lighter fluid on the charcoal grill while the guy's smoking, which I think is a great picture. But micro warehousing, in the simplest sense of the word, as you'll see on the next page, is really it's almost it's a physical and a psychological bifurcation in your mind that separates shopping from buying. So it's basically the technological innovation that allows a back of house operation to operate separately or exogenously from the front of house operation. And the best way to think about this is to look at the next page and to think about an IKEA. Okay, an IKEA store, if you reimagine it with technology, is quite a marvel. It's an operation. It's a marvel in terms of how it's set up operationally. If you think about it, IKEA is just like a GH Lab or a Bonobos or a guide shop. It's a showroom up front. You walk through the experience. Everything's laid out for you. But imagine now through technology, if instead of writing down names you can't pronounce on a piece of paper with a pencil, you could instead use your mobile phone, walk through that experience, scan items for purchase. And instead of you having to go into that warehouse that is separated from that front of house experience, all of those items could instead be picked for you and packed for you and delivered to anywhere you want in the world versus you having to go pick them yourselves or stand in line to pay for them. But through advances in micro warehousing, specifically automation technology and robotics, that world is not far off from happening. And so as more retailers set up their operations to enable that type of pick and pack to happen while people shop, you'll get incredible advantages for both the retailers from an economics perspective and for the consumers from a shopping perspective. In a lot of ways, in the next slide, if you're old enough to remember this, and I am, it's a little bit like service merchandise model back in the 1980s, but it's done in such a way that technology makes it relevant again. Because basically technology can now do is celebrate the act of shopping and leave fulfillment or the act of how one acquires product as more of an afterthought that just sort of happens behind the scenes. Now, there's a couple of examples of companies you should be aware of that are aggressively going after it in this space. Walmart is trying this out, as you'll see on the next slide, with a company called Alert Innovation. So they have a robot called the AlphaBot. They basically built in one of their New Hampshire stores a 20,000 square foot adjacent micro warehouse to set up an operation very similar to how an IKEA works. And the idea is that AlphaBot or that robot will pick and pack their grocery orders for delivery and for in-store pickup. And then there's another company that I like a lot that I'm paying a lot of close attention to, and that's a company called Takeoff. Takeoff has signed deals with Sedano supermarkets down in Florida, with Stop and Shop up in Connecticut, with Albertsons. And basically their business model is really unique. They basically say to grocers, they say, look, direct to consumer grocery fulfillment is coming. You got to get on the board. You got to get on board, and you got to do something about it. And as a result, you probably don't need as much space in your physical stores as you currently have. So give us a portion of it, say 5 to 10,000 square feet. We're going to come in with tried and true techniques for fulfilling grocery online. We're going to set up a micro warehouse in your space. And suddenly we're going to give you much more economies and efficiencies because we know how to do it. We know how to use automation to pick and pack it quickly and efficiently more than you do. And because you're already located very close to the consumer from a last mile perspective, your shipping costs are going to go down as well. So I think it's a really interesting model to watch as we go forward. But ultimately, there you have it. In a nutshell, those are really the 5 trends that I would highlight that I would pay attention to over the next 5 years that I think are really going to impact how the future of retail unfolds. And as you'll see on the concluding slide, that is real, or sorry, on these last 2 concluding slides, those are really the definitions of what new retail is. If you want the single best example of it, I would encourage you to check out a video online surrounding the Hema grocery store by Alibaba, and that's spelled Hema. There's a great 4.5-minute video, and that shows you everything that I'm talking about in practice. The beauty of that story, and you can see it here in this picture, is essentially it's set up so that it's a choose your own adventure as a consumer experience. So if the consumer wants to go in and shop and pick things and put them in a cart and stand in line to check out, they can do that. But you can also see that everything is barcoded. And so the consumer can, at the end of the day, shop products with their mobile phone, scan those barcodes, and they can check out, bag them themselves, and walk out the store. Or if they want a micro warehousing capability, we'll pick and pack those products and have them delivered to wherever they want in a very short amount of time. So there's really 3 different ways to interact with that store, which means that that person's shopping experience is really unique to that individual, especially considering that it's all happening on a mobile phone, which is a very personalized device. So again, if you think back to what I said at the beginning, physical world, looking at these trends, now no longer have to be the same for everyone. Physical shopping experiences can be different from one person to the next. And that, in the concluding side, to me, is really the definition of new retail. What makes that happen is really that shopping is separate from buying. And by doing that, by leveraging technology to make that happen, experiences can then, in essence, be more experiential. They can be celebrated for more of what they are in terms of the tactile and the sensory joys of retailing. And at the end of the day, what's important too is that it allows retailers to find new ways to do their business, both from a working capital and an operational expense perspective.
Chris, fascinating. Really, really interesting to hear your comments. So many things to unpack there. I mean, I love the idea. I love what you talked about in regards to Amazon Go. I actually didn't know that they had scale plans to be at 3,000 by 2021. I believe that's what you said, and 22 billion in R&D. That's mind-boggling. And so really, really interesting things to unpack there. And then also, I just found very interesting what you were talking about in regards to digitally native pure plays and coming into the physical realm. So as part of the discovery process, and everything that kind of lends to the shopper journey there, right? So it's interesting to see that there is a place for brick and mortar, although it's evolving as we're going on here. But with that in mind, I just wanted to take the audience through a couple of pieces on what we do at Uberall and how we've helped within the retail category and how we work specifically with the retail outfit. Just was trying to do a better job on discovery themselves as part of the shopper experience. And so the partner that we worked with is called InventTrust. It's a real estate investment trust. They own about 77 retail properties across the U.S., representing 13.5 million square feet of retail space and locations from everywhere from California to Florida to Texas. And their business model is essentially rent revenue, right? So in order to support their constituents, which are essentially like grocery stores like Kroger's and Big Box, and then a bunch of peripheral smaller locations around, like, the juice bar and the coffee shop and the dry cleaner, they basically looked at a program to assist them in driving business, and that was via marketing. And so they faced a couple of challenges. We're familiar with some of the challenges they faced just in the corporate to local environment. And so they sure enough faced one of those challenges, which was a lot of their tenant composition, which were these retail national regional stores. They were doing a lot of marketing based on corporate sort of driven brand awareness ideas. And it doesn't necessarily trickle down into the local environment or the store levels. And so that's a constant problem that remained. Another was just these smaller businesses. They just wanted to show up. They were so busy in what they were doing in their daily lives that marketing was a very distant concern. And so they just wanted, awareness about what they did as part of the experience that they offer as maybe a smaller business than compared to big bucks. So things like hours, address, photos, offers, just basic information, right? And then a third challenge was with InventTrust just being a property and a brand to differentiate themselves from the competition. So when a tenant was checking out a retail space, they would choose InventTrust. So location marketing was one of the answers that they chose to go out there and execute against as part of their marketing initiative program. And what is location marketing, right? So just to give you guys an idea of what it is, it's basically, within the Uberall context, software that manages data across 120 different digital touch points. So that's, search sites, social sites, in-app, and navigation services, voice searches, and voice services with Alexa, Siri, and Cortana coming into play. Just to be 100% accurate, right? It's a very nice marketing solution for retail. And the second component is just to engage and have a two-way conversation with the shopper as part of, being a part of reputation and review management. So that's what we do at Uberall. And the premise is simple. If the retail location could be found online, they could also be shopped. So what we did was, from a concept standpoint, what did location marketing really do for InventTrust here? Well, there was a direct impact and an indirect impact. The direct impact was that, mobile and device searches, when you're doing planned purchases, you're going through all of your research, right? Price comparisons, deals, offers, whatever the case may be. And that's what's leading you to a physical environment and a planned purchase. The spillover effect or an indirect impact is really what we call the spillover effect or an impulse purchase, where you're looking at all the surrounding stuff that you would want to patronize as an emotional response, as a situational cue, and even a near me search that would lead you maybe 3 minutes away to something that is just based out of convenience and location. So that's those are some of the criteria that location marketing solves, direct and indirect. From an execution standpoint, Uberall, we really tried to customize and cater to what InventTrust's goals were and some of the challenges they were facing and trying to solve for those. And so part of the first piece of that anyway was communication, just outreach to make sure there was awareness in the entire tenant composition to make sure that this is being offered up on deck. The second was just creating a website to make sure that data was easily collected at the individual store level. The third was bringing property managers just to be influencers and evangelists as their first line of defense and to have a direct relationship with all the stores. And so they were a great part in playing in the adoption of this program. And then the fourth was just reinforcing with email, direct mail, and a specific phone call to the individual tenant. So we saw a really nice boost in adoption as a result of the customized execution that we took on. And if you look at the first results, we don't have Q4 in yet, but from what we've got up to date, we saw some really nice metrics come out in regards to uplift. So we saw uplift across the board in website traffic conversion. So at the individual store levels, at the aggregate viewpoint, they saw an uplift in web traffic, which is fantastic. The middle metric there was an uplift in center click. So that's on the listing, the profile page itself, and that was 16%. So, and from a perception standpoint, what InventTrust, the feedback they gave us was this from an operational standpoint, they hadn't seen this variance before. And so that was really fantastic to see that there was a true uplift as a result of location marketing. And the third component was driving directions. And that's a metric that really is typically associated as a direct impact of location marketing. And that was, navigation as a result of discovery, right? So 15% increase there. As an extension of that, with some of the goals, as I told you earlier, were, shopping centers, bringing it about awareness with specific shopping centers. And so White Oak Crossing, which is sort of a very, I'll say not super unusual property within the portfolio, not the newest and not the biggest, not enclosed. They saw nice improved rankings organically as a result of location marketing, and then a byproduct. I think multi attribution was a higher tenant occupancy as well. But that was really nice to see that there was some a brand center presence as a result of location marketing as well. And at the tenant level, I mean, some pretty neat stats and some pretty nice results. So when you're looking at, as an example, we saw YogaPod as a tenant. They dominated both on the left and the right that we see here as a direct search, where you're going to show up for a name anyway, right? Somebody's searching for YogaPod, dominating the left side as well as the right side with really rich, optimized profile data and information with booking links, reviews, and all the basics as well. And on the right side, when somebody's doing an indirect search, they were really nicely showing up for optimized and enriched profile as well. And the last piece of that was the spillover effect, as I had said earlier, which was as they were sort of proliferated across these 50 plus digital touch points. You had someone who was also participating in the program show up as an indirect result. So once somebody got done doing yoga, they could possibly consider doing a bundt cake if that was to their fancy. So some of these results really nice to see in us participating in the retail category. I've got a couple of slides just to talk about Uberall. What we are at Uberall is we call it location marketing, and that's essentially listings management, a two-way conversation with reputation response, review response. We've got web cards that can hang off websites just to make our software work really seamlessly to update information across multi-channels. Ads is a component of what we do as well, with automated ads on Google and Facebook based on location. And then, with our partnerships approach, we're really an API-first technology-driven company where we seamlessly integrate within a tech stack or within an IT environment. So some things just to consider when you think about Uberall, if you hadn't heard of us already. As a profile, we are a global entity, San Francisco-based offices, Berlin-based offices, offices in the UK, France, and Netherlands, and South Africa, and 800,000 locations on our platform where we manage and sync real-time data and information and awareness and all the things that we've talked about for these brands and individual locations. So, a big portfolio with McDonald's, Shell, Domino's, among some of the national brands that we work with, as well as partners in single platform, Moz, Vendasta, 1&1, and Census. So that just gives you a sense of who we are. Chris, I'm going to take it into Q&A now. So we've got a few questions that are coming in. And so the first one,
great.
I guess somebody was listening to you on the Amazon Go piece.
Okay.
So here it is.
All right.
Here's what they're saying. So for your money,
okay,
what's better? Amazon Go checkout free shopping or scan and go shopping?
That's a great question. I think it really depends on the use case. So I think, like I said, I think Amazon Go, the way they're doing it, basically they're using visual recognition systems for their checkout free experience. Those work really well right now in low square footages, where the product offering is pretty small. It's not very wide. It's not very diverse. So I think, in those examples, like they're doing, where it's, say, an urban location, lots of traffic, you need to get in and out quick. Places like an airport, they've talked about, like hospitals potentially, those types of experiences. I think that makes a ton of sense. So in those places, I would use those experiences. But I think in larger experiences, say a la traditional grocery store, I think more of what you see, say, with the Uma supermarket in China, I think that's a better way to go. I think it's interesting. Kroger this week just announced that they're doing some pilots with Microsoft in that same vein. So I think the scan and go technology has much more flexibility. It's interesting when you talk about this, the separation of shopping from buying. If you think about Amazon Go, they actually haven't separated those two things out psychologically. So if you don't want to carry your products home, that experience doesn't really work for you. Or if you want to immerse yourself in a different type of shopping experience, in ways that you could with, say a scan and go approach, a la like taking routes from IKEA or something like that. You can't really do that with that type of checkout free technology. So I think there are different use cases that lend itself to that. And then I think over time, actually, you possibly will even see hybrids of both. So in a lot of ways, there is no one right answer. But I think for my money, in terms of looking more at mass, more at scale, more at quicker adoption across the landscape, I'd be looking at Scan and Go much more rapidly than I think people are, just because it also really doesn't cost that much to experiment with it, whereas visual recognition technology can be pretty expensive.
That's great. Yeah, good to get a sense of the delineation there. Here's another one just came through. So I guess it's talking about when you're talking about product search. And so the question is, your stats surrounding product search, do those hold up across the board, or are there categorical differences?
No, I think, yeah, that's an awesome question too. I think that's really a great question too, in terms of like what you shared at the end too, in terms of just the importance of data and where people are psychologically in trying to understand what they want to do across every single category. So, that's what the data is in total. But if you look at what activity people are conducting across, say, beauty or grocery, people are in very, very, very different mindsets in terms of where on the internet they're trying to go to find certain things. And so it is important that depending on what category they're looking for, if they, put a certain thing in that they're searching for, if, they've cognizantly made that decision to say, you know what, I actually want to make sure I go find this somewhere. I'm not just going to go buy this digitally. I'm using this more for research, or I think I know what I want. But I need a little bit more expertise, or I need that traction, or I really want to have that experience. They really need to be able to, have really good data served up so they know where they can go, because it truly isn't a one size fits all approach. Now, it is heavily weighted that way in certain categories, and it's all the categories you'd expect. It's the things that aren't really super differentiated and you don't really care where you buy them, right? It's all the categories that have, kind of hit that tipping point in e-commerce, from books to sporting goods to electronics, where it's all the same for everybody. But the categories where it's not that way, or where the fulfillment dynamics haven't been established the way they have in those categories, say in healthcare as another example, grocery, there are wide-ranging category differences.
Great insights, Chris. So I got a last one here, and I think we're going to wrap up post this. But this is a really important one. I think it just kind of speaks to me. I'm based in San Francisco, and I think that there's certainly an ecosystem awareness regionally in this area than perhaps some other parts more so. And so a question coming in here was talking about corporate responsibility. So as these ideas grow in shoppers' minds, how are corporate responsibility, social consciousness going to have an impact on retailers? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's huge. I mean, I actually, one of the things that I talk about a lot frequently in the work I do is I talk about kind of the new engine, or the new flywheel of retail. And really for me, it's predicated upon 2 points of differentiation. One is what I already mentioned, which is data, which is, how do you set up both a physical and digital operation to really have a true understanding of everything that's happening within both those spaces from a data perspective. Like, we know all the funnel economics on a website. We don't know that in a store, but a lot of what I shared with you in terms of the trends will give you that understanding. The second point is what you asked specifically about, and I think that really is the idea of social impact. I think when you look at the generational dynamics that are coming into play, the younger generations demand that companies have an understanding of objectively how they're impacting the world. And that's another part where Amazon is, I think, vulnerable. If you look at Amazon's flywheel, what the center of it's all based around growth. It's just an unending pursuit of growth. It's really interesting to think about. Whereas if you are a company who instead talks not just about growth, but actually talks about the objective impact you're having on the world, that can position you in a very different way. And especially when you think about that horizontal line of commerce that I talked about, I think that's where, if you have your origins in a social network where you're objectively talking about the impact you're having on the world, that can extend you into new places from a commercial standpoint that you weren't able to go before. It can give you defensible niches that, can kind of, I'm not saying beat Amazon, but can at least allow you to coexist with them and others effectively over time.
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, there's so many examples of that I see, at a more regional or local level that really resonates. And I feel like it'll continue to sort of happen, right? I think to put it in the context of just being a good Samaritan, right? That's traditionally how people think about it. But if you're thinking about it in the context of how it elevates your brand from a commercial standpoint, that's really fascinating. And so great thoughts there, Chris. All right, I think that's the time we've got. So we're going to wrap up. Thanks to everybody joining. I think we're going to have a PDF of this sent out to all of our listeners, and there's going to be a recorded version of this too that we'll put on our website. And as a secondary piece, please don't forget we've got a webinar coming up on the 7th of February. It's with Robert Craven, who is the founder and author of the GYDA initiative, and it's titled "What the High Performing Channel Partners Do Differently from the Rest." It should be a really, really good webinar. I encourage everybody to sign up and join for that. It is at 8 a.m. Pacific and 11 Eastern. So with that, I will sign off. Thank you, Chris, again. Thank you to everybody who attended, and we will see you next time.